All right. So Andy and Pat, we were reconvening the wise men here. And here's what struck me the other day was that both of you are leaders in a whole industry that you guys have created of people who've made an incredible success of themselves, convincing people like me and a lot of other people to come out and watch games and buy tickets and enjoy the experience of being at a ballpark arena / stadium. And now that's all. I mean, everyone's asking how sports is going to come back. And that's the thing that struck me the other day is it's coming back without everything that you two were masters of. Is that kind of struck? You guys been struck by that?
Well, it's all kind of
Pat go first.
It's all kind of a guessing. It's a guessing game is what it is. Because if you think about it, without sports, the people who cover sports are, they're just guessing, they're running all this stuff from years past. They're just guessing and they're kind of looking for clues. The people on the far end are sports fans. They're finding other ways to take up their time. And unfortunately, the people who work in sports are sort of just guessing what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing that's sort of maybe most distressing is that nobody knows. Nobody really knows. And I think the thing that we've learned going through this, at least that I've learned, is that, until people feel safe and they're confident, I think that's going to be one of the keys about sort of bringing this thing back. And we should talk about, the observations, what's going on in baseball recently. But Andy, what's your take?
Well, from a macro standpoint, I love to throw in macro, right? Micro. I think that Pat is absolutely right. Nobody knows the answer to what is the most popular 3-letter word in the sports world right now, which is HOW. How? I literally just had a call with an NHL executive friend of mine who will be unnamed, but works for a team north of the border. And he was talking about their new announcement of the tournament that they're going to play with 24 teams. But he has 2 young boys, I think like 9 and 12. He was much more concerned to what Pat said about their youth sports and how they come back socially in the Vancouver market than what was going to happen to his team in the playoffs. And if you go to baseball, basketball, the NFL, soccer, and all that, everybody has a different plan. And many of those plans have changed 22 times in the last 23 days. Yeah. And as Pat said, the logo of sports should really be a gigantic question mark with HOW.
I read, it's on, I think it's still on the New York Times website. I don't know if they printed it in the paper yet, but it's on the website. The president of the University of Notre Dame wrote an op-ed 2 days ago about the decision, because Notre Dame was pretty much the first major university to come out and say, hey, we're back for business. And they're doing it in a certain way. They're going to come back early in August, finish by Thanksgiving, not having any breaks, so no one goes in and out. But the point I'm making is that the Father Jenkins, the president, was really, I thought, pretty cogent about describing the entire dilemma that he faced. Both sides, acknowledging both sides, and then explaining here's why we decided to do this. But his premise was, look, there's going to be risk no matter what. There will be risk. And I guess it struck me that's where sports is too, right? I mean, look at Broadway, right? Broadway's paralyzed, right? Broadway can't come back, period, right? And there's no television money in Broadway. Sports is coming back because of television money. Does that make sense?
At least sports has fantasy. Is there fantasy Broadway?
Well, and gambling, right? Yeah, true. Good point.
Yeah, but all the fantasy stuff is just static right now because nobody knows what to say. It says if we can't talk about today, let's talk about some stuff that happened yesterday and hope that people are interested enough in it. I mean, what this really is the famous philosopher Yogi Berra said it probably better, is if people don't want to come out to the ballpark, you can't make them. And it's sort of true is that the venue of today and what the venue of tomorrow is going to look like is sort of vastly different. And it's interesting. I mean, baseball sort of borne the brunt of all this. Basketball, they're probably going to push their season back. The sport with the most hubris right now is the NFL, and they're sort of cocky about it. Their big announcement, a couple of weeks ago, was that here's our big announcement, and we're sensitive. We're not going to play games overseas this year.
Yeah.
You're kind of going, what? I mean, what?
Yeah.
Maybe they're sheltering in a place differently than I am.
Right. They're playing the calendar game. We don't have to worry about that right now. We're not coming back to training camp till August. Who knows what that might be? I want to be on the spray team in the NFL, right? Everybody wants to be on the chain gang. What a great job that is. But when there's a fumble in the NFL, is there going to be a spray team that will come out there and Purell the heck out of 10 people who are on the ground? Yeah. In a sport that you exchange essential bodily fluids on every play, you want to tell me how that's going to work?
Yeah, I don't know. And since you brought it up, Ted, we might as well talk about what's going on with baseball right now, in that, now they're talking about, okay, we can start spring training here. We can do games with no fans. We can start here and then play. And by the way, players, you can stay in shape. But what's going on now is one of those things, either the owners and the players, particularly the owners, don't remember what happened in 1994 during the what was equal in baseball to the pandemic, which was the cancellation of the season and the World Series. If all of a sudden the game is, people are ready to start watching games and all that stuff, but the reason it can't come back is because the players and the owners can't make a deal. It's entirely possible. I'm watching this thing and I'm sort of praying that this thing doesn't go sideways, but I study history of this stuff, and it may very well.
Well, we've all, this group here, we've all lived through a bunch of those problems in baseball. I was in '95 when baseball finally did resume real baseball, and Pat, you were with the Giants also. We opened the season finally in Atlanta after an accelerated real spring training. We opened the season in Atlanta, the Atlanta Braves, and when the players were introduced on opening day, Tom Glavine was booed in his own ballpark because he was one of the lead player reps during that whole 8 or 9 month off-season stuff. And that's the thing to me that anybody with any memory, why would anybody in baseball want to go down that path again?
Two things that jump up when Pat was talking. First, is there an erase button, like a Zoom erase button, that can take Kirk Gibson's freaking home run off of my computer, and then Pat might want the 1989 World Series to be for us. So
the Gibson home run was one of the great moments in sports history. What are you talking about?
Those two. The other point is money. You think about where we're at in our global economy and our national economy, and we have billionaires in baseball arguing publicly with millionaires. And I don't know what the total perceived net worth of baseball is, but let's say north of $70 billion in terms of valuation of teams. If I've lost my job or I've been furloughed, am I caring one bit about this kind of debate? And then the A's locally have really jumped into the fray. Sorry, we're not going to pay $1.2 million worth of our yearly rent because we're not playing games. And then their owner, for the first time in 14 years, decides to sort of speak publicly through an open letter and furloughs half of his work staff, both on the baseball and business side. How does that deal with the logic that we're dealing with in our own communities and our own families? That is a disconnect of biblical proportions.
Yeah. And you point out the owner, Andy, and I point out the player, the Tampa Bay pitcher that made the incredibly callous, thoughtless comment about "I want mine," summarizing, which is exactly why this 25 years ago the Glavine situation happened, because that's the attitude the fans took, right? The fans said the players don't care about us; I want mine, and I'm 60. I think the guy has a $68 million contract. So what do you, because you guys have both been through this on the deep inside. So if baseball, which thrives off its regional television money, right? If baseball doesn't play this year, what would you guys expect a longer term fallout to be from that?
Well, I'll just say that it may very well not play this year. And so you would have a camp of, potential owners and maybe some players, but mostly owners who say, you know what, this is a way for us to finally get an edge up on the players. We can finally get them to come across the table for us if they don't get paid for a while. And what they don't realize is they haven't studied history. They haven't studied the history of the labor issues in baseball, and they don't know what they're all not focusing on is the damage to the brand of baseball, which is pretty, we used to say, I think it was Andy said it, it's like the cockroach of sports. I mean, you can abuse it, you can beat it up, you can do whatever, and it'll keep coming back for more. But there probably is some sort of a limit. And, you focus on the big league. What about the 160 minor league teams and all these communities that are trying to figure out what to do? So there's a big ripple effect of all this. And I just think it may not come back the way that we would hope it would.
Look at the entry levels, no Little League Baseball this year. Think about how many millions or softball. Think about how many millions of boys and girls that would naturally transition into baseball through them playing it and loving it. And now if you go to your communities, what do you see kids doing? They're maybe kicking a soccer ball, they're dribbling a basketball. You don't see a lot of dads throwing BP. I'm not saying there aren't or having it catch. And if I'm not developing my next generation of fans, that scares the heck out of me. That's how a business thrives.
Yeah. Because we all have a little bit of memory here. The NHL missed an entire season. And I can't remember which year it was, but they missed an entire year. And they came back and they survived. Could baseball do that?
Yeah, baseball could do that. They could do that. But the collateral damage to the people who sort of make the game work, the ones who work, in the sport, whether they're working for a franchise, whether they're working for a television network, whether they're covering sports, those are the people that are going to they're going to be the collateral damage. And so the owners, are sort of going to wait. They could wait, for a while and they could come back. And yes, they'll deal with the damage and all that, but it's going to leave some lasting effect, I think. And it's not going to come back as fast as people would, but I think it will come back. I do.
Sports has always been that agent of warmth that could go to a community when it suffered a trauma. We've talked about it, 9/11, Katrina, the Earthquake World Series that we all went through. And, you see President Bush throw out the pitch at Yankee Stadium in front of, 60,000 people crying and celebrating. Now you're going to have somebody throw out a first pitch in front of nobody, saluting, healthcare workers. I think baseball's greatest challenge is the lack of fans and that sort of vacuum that when somebody takes one deep in the ninth inning and they're celebrating at home plate, what are we doing? I don't know. That one seems to be a disconnect.
Well, and Andy, because you came in and started Billy Ball, you didn't really experience this. Pat, 1985. You had a full year with an empty stadium.
Well, we did social distancing before anybody knew what it was.
It was a leader way before.
I would have been happy with 6 feet apart with the fans. It was kind of like, it was the old thing about, well, what time's today's game? And you'd say to the fans, well, what time can you be here? All this kind of stuff. But the games the sport will come back, but there will be some collateral damage in the process. And unfortunately, it's going to be to a lot of people who who can't afford to do it. And I even think about the players too. I mean, we focus on the very wealthy players, and people who tend to do that. But what about a guy who's only got a few years to get developed that have a chance to play at the big league level, who all of a sudden now is going to miss that opportunity? So that's going to be part of the damage too.
Yesterday, I'm on this committee at the San Jose Sports Authority, and Dan Oram from the San Jose Giants, who you know and work with days, he's looking for a way to repurpose their little jewel of a stadium to do events, and he can't get it done yet because Santa Clara County has significant restrictions, maybe the tightest in Northern California. And there's a perfect example of these 162 minor league teams or whatever it is. How many of those are going to go out of business by the time of next year?
Yeah.
Well,
go ahead, Pat.
No. So, I mean, hey, the best idea I've heard so far, I think the most creative idea, is bringing back a concept that has been dying for the last 40 years, which is allow people to actually drive their cars on the field and park in rows and recreate the old drive-in theater with the video board, where, you know, people are hermetically sealed in their cars, so they're social distancing. And I mean, I don't know who's going to do that because of the damage potentially to the field, but it's a pretty interesting idea.
No, I think it's great because in the Bay Area we could have the Ferrari row, the Tesla row. We could upcharge for what people are doing. I think it's brilliant, no doubt.
I think, Pat, you know, we had a drive-in graduation, high school graduation, right in our neighborhood. The very thing you just talked about, using an empty field and allowing people and parents to drive their cars out there. And that's how they did commencement. I thought that was a pretty cool idea.
You know, if you look at the positives of all this, aside from the positives that, you know, it's making people, you know, forcing them to get together with their families and all that stuff. But there are going to be some things that have been a result of this pandemic that are going to stay with us, which are things like this thing Zoom that we have. I mean, which are, and other things that may not have happened unless the pandemic sort of forced it into happening. So I don't know. I'd like to look on the bright side of some things. I just worry about the sports, particularly the one that I spent most of my life in, because I care about it, and I care mostly about the people who are working in it.
Yeah. Well, let me, and this is great because I know I can tell you both. I mean, in my little narrow world, it's already changing. I mean, it's going to change, I think, the way the Olympics are presented next summer. It's going to change over the next couple of years, the amount of time that I travel to sporting events. It's going to change. So my point back to where you guys have spent a lot of your lives in baseball. So if baseball can't, at least in the short term, say, come to my house to enjoy the ball game, can baseball make it better in your house? Can baseball use television and technology, like you said, Pat,
Absolutely. I think the argument that unfortunately baseball is dealing with every day is the money, the tug of war that we've talked about. What I want to hear about is, are you putting a mini camera in the umpire's face mask? Is every player going to be mic'd when we come back? What kinds of technological improvements? What kind of VR, AR? All of that this season in all the sports is the ultimate laboratory. It's the ultimate beta test. The fans will get that it's all not going to work well. But if I'm baseball that's stuck to a certain extent in people's minds in yesterday, I'm going to have as many things about tomorrow to show the fans, and I get excited about that.
Well, the way I look at it is, it's sort of like the fans are going to say, well, look, give us what you got. If what you got is games on television with no fans, okay, do that. And then I'll decide whether it's interesting enough to watch. I mean, I might watch 2 or 3 pitches of it and say, you know, maybe I'll come back at some point. So but it's kind of like, give us what you got, and we'll see what we may want. As customers, as viewers, as customers, we're sort of the ultimate decision makers as to what is it that we're willing to pay for, and sort of what level of unsafety are we willing to go through and take our families and friends to. I mean, that's going to be the ultimate decider, I think.
Yeah, that gets back to the risk question, and and there was another, the New York Times this morning had a story about the NBA and its plan to go to Orlando and resume everything in one location, which is an obvious play because Disney's been losing, what, 30 million a day with its theme parks being closed. But one NBA general manager, said the line that's out there, which is, why is it any safer now than it was in March? And that gets to your point, Pat. I think there's going to be assumed risk no matter what and when we do something.
I go from the giant super duper Olympics that you have experience with, the large ballparks that Pat and I do, but I think all three of us could put on our grandpa hat here, right? And if the decision comes, okay, Grandpa, you're taking the entire family to the game, to the restaurant, to X in the community, we might go, not this month, or maybe not this year. Let's do it later. And that's our community.
It's not a tragedy.
Yeah,
it's not a tragedy because there's what it showed us is there's a lot more important things than sports, than baseball. I mean. It may be one of the good things is it sort of knocked everybody off their pins a little bit. And the hubris that all the sports people have, I'm sort of thinking that we're pretty important. And, all those extra zeros that are at the end of either our salary or our ticket prices or our beer prices, we just to sort of expect you to pay that. Well, you know what? People can kind of say, well, I'm not so sure. And I don't know. I think it's a good thing because you got to focus on the value. What is the value of what you're giving, and what are people willing to do? I mean, I mentioned Yogi Berra, who's I had a chance to meet my favorite guy because his common sense. A lot of people thought he was stupid. I think he was one of the smartest guys because he was just so obvious about the things that he talked about.
Well, to Pat's point, we all have logos, right? We have lots of business cards.
Mm-hmm.
So now what you have is your name, who you are, is more important, as Pat said, than just, okay, what's your current logo? What's your title? How many people do you have in the office? It's who are you and how are you making this a better world in the midst of the challenges that we're all facing?
Andy, you may lead the sports industry in business cards. I mean, if you took all your business cards and put them on the wall, you could. I mean, that would be a project. Take everyone.
You got that?
There you
got
go.
that?
No, that's just a tiny snippet of the cards that you had.
Yeah, only a tiny snippet. I got 16 or 17 of them. That phone ring, I would just jump in. I looked at the name. It's a person I've talked to in another city that has been reading the Oakland A's articles.
Yeah.
And is that team coming to my city? Like, that team ain't coming any place soon, but this guy is in another city and believes that the A's, Tampa Bay, and Miami are coming to his city. That's pretty funny.
I have to say, I think I did say it to both Pat and Andy before we started this. This is awesome because this might be the first one of these remote, whether it's Zoom or webinars or whatever call, where I don't have books behind everybody. And the books that that people never read, but they put them out there to make them look.
I could do beer cans behind me.
You mean like this book? Like this book? Or how about this book? How about this book?
Fantastic.
We would all say that we should read this book. This is Joan Ryan's new book, and Matt and I just had Joan on our podcast the other day. This is a spectacular book called Intangibles, and I would tell everybody, go online right now and buy this book. Right, Pat?
Yeah, great book, great person. A lot of good things to think about.
Yeah.
So Teddy, you're talking to us. Tell us about.
Oh, here's one more. Here's one more.
So
this is your break on sports.
You've made an incredible living, bringing all this stuff, bringing all these different sports, and you're sitting here. I mean, I think you're being incredibly, motivated and entrepreneurial about it. But what do you think? What do you think is going to happen?
With sports, yeah. I mean, I alluded to it more from my world, which is television now. It's going to dramatically change. And what we're doing right now is, as you guys both pointed out, is going to be, look, it's opening the eyes, right? It's opening the eyes of executives in television who, just like executives of teams, are going to look to ways to do things more financially sensibly and responsibly. So I think, for example, I understand that they're going to play the U.S. Open tennis in Labor Day frame in New York, and the French Open is going to play in late September in Paris. I've been told, for example, for the French Open, though, hold your plane reservation, but you may come to Los Angeles and do it. They may be done remotely because, and that's going to be the French government that makes that decision. It's not going to be the French Tennis Federation. The French government is going to decide who can come into the country, right, and who can't. Same as the U.S. Open. I'm told already they've decided that the only television property, the only television presence that will be allowed on the property in New York is ESPN. So that means the 75 other worldwide countries that pay rights fees to televise the U.S. Open will do it from their home countries, and they'll take a world fee. So now, fast forward to next summer, I think it's going to change the way the Olympics are presented. And I think there's probably a likelihood now that far more of us will go to Connecticut and we'll cover the Olympics from Connecticut because it's going to be safer. It's going to be easier for the Japanese government, again, having fewer people come in. The most important thing for Japan is going to be housing 14,000 athletes safely, right?
Maybe it'll keep them from building a 100,000 seat venue that they use once or twice, and then falls into decay.
Yeah.
I mean,
but I just think that is a really important point that may be obvious, but I just thought about it. If you ask people, like, which city in the United States is the most important city in sports right now and will be for the next few years, how would people answer that? New York, Chicago, LA, San Francisco go, no. I'm talking about a small little place in Connecticut, right? The headquarters of ESPN.
Well, yeah, ESPN, and then Stanford, which is a new suburb where NBC is what I was referencing. But you're right, and the other thing that I think about, this is the business end that you guys have excelled in, is that the amount of television cord cutting that's going on right now has accelerated. Netflix has gone through the roof, as we know. The other streaming services, which are all either in their infancy or starting up. Disney Plus has already been a huge success. And so all of a sudden, when we come out of this and the next rights fees rounds come along, ESPN really, are they going to be the bidder they've been in the past? Or is it going to be for ESPN Plus, which is an extra $6 a month on top of the $8 a month you already pay for ESPN? And that's been the lifeblood of sports teams, right?
It has been, but sort of behind the facade, none of us really know what's happening. And like, you listen to people, like Warren Buffett. One of his great lines about this, he says, when the tide goes out, you can sort of see who's swimming naked, which is, and it was like the famous thing where people would, for years, they would talk about, well, how can two baseball teams survive in the Bay Area?
Yeah.
And one economist, I can't remember who it was, he said, well, if they keep losing money at this rate, they might only be able to survive for another 300 years, maybe 300 or 400 years. So,
it probably wasn't our good friend Roger Knoll who figured.
I don't know. It was somebody. But
Andrew Zimbalist.
What we're going to see, I mean, John Fisher may be the one honest guy about this, who's, he's sitting there like Scrooge McDuck on his pile of money, and he's thinking about, what are these nickels and dimes that we're paying all of our employees? They're not all that important until we're ready to go. I mean, he just doesn't have a feel for what this is all about. There's a lot of people, there's a lot of owners in sports or groups of owners who are probably thinking the same things he is, but they're just either don't have the good sense to keep from doing it, or they have people who are telling them not to do it.
And to Ted's point from the broadcast side, where people, binge watching, that didn't exist until a few years ago. Now people are waiting for some sort of injection or pill that you could take that would let you watch The Last Dance in 5.5 minutes, right? All 10 episodes. I don't have time watch all 10 episodes. Just jam me. Let me watch all of that. Let me do 162 games of baseball in a week because I don't have time. I'm too busy.
Yeah. But I think both of you guys know this very well. I mean, I think we're entering a phase of our existence now where it's about human behavior, right? It's human. That's what it's going to be. It's not about disposable income as we've all lived through. It's about human behavior. I mean, I heard Tom Friedman said this on a show at the beginning of the virus. That was brilliant. He said, after 9/11, we had to reach the point where we could walk on an airplane and sit down and trust that the person next to us didn't have something in their shoe, right? Now it's going to be the virus. When are we going to feel comfortable walking into a venue, theater, restaurant, airplane, obviously?
What's really scary is human misbehavior that we see examples of every day. That's the part that scares the heck out of me as we start to get to the point of bringing people back, because our level of teamwork in this great country of ours is as challenged as it's ever been in our lifetime.
Well, I mean, I just sort of look at it as, none of us are getting out of this thing alive. So I just don't want to die. I don't want to die eating a ballpark hot dog. Okay. I don't want to die coming down the escalator at a ballpark and all of a sudden, I forgot to put the Purell on and I'm infected. I don't want to die that way. So it's going to be up to the people who run these things to figure out how to make it safe. I just hope, and are they going to find a vaccine this year? Maybe it's next year, or maybe the year after that. I mean, some of this stuff can't really come back fully until, until where's Dr. Jonas Salk? When we need him most is to come back and come up with a, with a cure for this that can get us all back to doing all the things we love to do.
If we're going to go, Pat, to what you were talking about, we want to be sitting next to each other with no facial coverings at Perry's, having Perry next to us, counting a few, right? And if we got to go at that circumstance, then we got to go, right?
So let me ask you guys both this, because again, of what you've done, I had a conversation yesterday with someone who told me that their 20-something college graduate had just enrolled in the online sports management master's program at Ohio University because of this shutdown, not knowing what would be next. What would both of you tell? Because I've had a couple of 20-somethings who've just graduated reach out to me during the last 10 weeks and say, what advice would you give me about getting into sports? Which is obviously the worst possible time to ask that question, I think. But give me some wisdom here.
What's that mean?
Go ahead.
That was a punt.
Okay, I'll go, since I'm a proud Ohio University graduate, from the days of cave drawings and horse-drawn carriages on the streets of Athens. I would say look at technology. Look at technology and sales. If we are going to have a business of sports in the future, which we are, sell. Show people that you have a network, that you're not afraid of sales, that you're not necessarily looking to be an analytical metricist or a metrical analyst or whatever the hell it's called. Get out there and show people you can sell and that you're a human being and that you have a full personality. At the same time, I'd look at the technological advances, and I don't mean how you define a great player in the combine. I mean bringing the sport to what you talked about, Ed, to those people's dens, those people's digital devices, because if we have a business in the future, it's going to be brought to you by more digital devices than ever before, but it's still going to be magical because fans are in a stadium watching the greatest athletes in the world do their thing in an unscripted setting.
Yeah, Teddy, I worry about, well, you talk about sports, sports education. Just think about education in general. All these parents are homeschooling all their kids now. I guess one of the things it's forcing all of us to do is to learn about how to communicate in the new digital world. I guess it's going to force us to do some things that we haven't. But maybe I'm old-timer enough to think, I don't think as good as the digital world is, I don't think there's anything that sort of replaces the real world. You know, the real, going to a real event with real people, you know, in the sunshine. I just think that there's going to be things that are sort of a substitute, and because we don't have that, but I don't think anything eventually will replace that. What I do worry about are the kids that are looking to try to get a job in sports going forward. What is it that what are the opportunities that are going to be available to them? We used to always tell them, you know, you go become an intern somewhere. Well, there isn't even that right now. So, you know, maybe they'll learn some new skills about, as Andy says, about ways to sell, storytelling. How do we tell stories in a really, really compelling and effective way? I think that's going to be maybe one of the benefits of the pandemic, is that it's going to make people tell stories in a more compelling way.
Pat, I have a licensing question. You being a great friend of the late Bill Campbell's and having downed a few gallons of brewski there, seeing that Old Pro, have you sub-licensed that? Because that's a perfect logo for you. The Old
Pro?
Yeah. Do you have the rights to that?
No. I'd like to say that they pay me to wear this.
I'm buying that. I am buying that. You are officially the spokesperson for the.
I am totally an Old Pro, so I sort of fit the brand description, but it's right now it's a defunct brand.
Yeah, and, well, hopefully it will come back.
I hope so.
Pat has paid for the right to wear that. Trust me.
Yes, he has. Yes.
He's an investor. Oh God. All right, guys, this is fun. Thanks for being wise men again today.
Well, wise guys or wise men?
Wise men, as I said.
Teddy, enjoyed doing it. I think that, you know, this is the thing that we can do now, is talk about what we think is going to happen. I'm waiting for the time when something actually happens.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because as I think I've told both you guys, I had Keith Hernandez and his brother Gary on a couple of weeks ago, and we were laughing because Keith was lamenting, you know, this concept of doing games with no fans. I said, Keith, you played in Cleveland, okay? Stop. And we all went to Montreal the last 6, 7, 8 years that baseball was there, when you'd have 1,000 people, rocketing around an empty dome stadium. It's not fun. We don't like that way. But we've all had some experience because we're all old pros to some level.
I would say on behalf of Pat and I, there are millions of seagulls around the Bay Area that are really upset.
Yeah, well,
they're not being fed anymore. What is that about? I'm sorry for those guys.
They probably moved out of town. You know, they probably said, "Okay, where can we go? Maybe they're going to Vegas. Who knows?"
Yeah, I mean, there's no damn seventh inning stretch for those sports calls. They're not happy.
I just hope that we don't get to a point. I asked this question to somebody yesterday. Are they going to paint the Dolores Park circles on the sidelines for football games and have to have players stand in those circles during football games this year?
The spray crew, Ted. Think about it. See you guys.
All right, guys.
Be well. Stay safe. Stay sane.
Okay. All right, Andy. Thanks, buddy. Patrick J. I'll be in touch.
Okay.
So yeah, talk to the boss and let me know.
I will. All right.